So top of the morning for me, people, and good afternoon to you, to yourselves over there. Welcome from, regardless of where you are coming from. I just want to acknowledge you for your time today. So the focus of today's presentation is cracking the code, mastering the art of closing, 16 guaranteed elements to mastering conversion that sales trainings won't teach you. So we'll just get straight into it. He says. So I have 3 clear intentions today. My intention is that you leave with massive value, that you leave the presentation knowing what to do to dramatically improve your closing strike rate. I had a few people say to me, Sally, how can you promise that from a presentation? You'll see that there is a self-audit that's going to be shared in this presentation. And my recommendation when I take you through the 16 elements is that you actually self-audit as we go, such that when you leave the presentation, you know exactly what it is that you need to do, but more about that later in the presentation. I also want you to feel inspired to stop tolerating not being masterful in your ability to close. I don't know about you, but there's a high percentage of people that say, I'm not good at closing, which is just crazy. Because when you get present to the cost, which is part of what we're going to cover off today, you know, the cost and the impact are just too great. So here's a statistic. Statistically, 50% of sales professionals won't hit their sales targets. And if you have a look at the statistic via this website that I've provided, there are extraordinary statistics to do with sales across the board. But that particular statistic I found quite interesting. When you think about globally, organizations around the globe, and if only 50% of the potential is leveraged, what could be possible if this particular area, which is to me the most important area of the sales process, you know, could be improved on, you know, what the potential opportunity could be. So I just thought I would raise that as well. So what I just want to make clear is that I'm not a sales consultant. I am a world-class leadership coach. I've got 25 years in the trenches. I've coached at CEO, C-suite, executive level for many years in CEO forums. So coaching high-level influencers is where I dance. My focus, when you think about coaches globally and or leadership service providers, how I differentiate is that I specialize in the area of sustainable transformation. If you're going to invest money into change, let's make sure it's sustainable. I also specialize in cultural change and program portfolio and project directorship at a very high level. So I'm more interested in the psychology of change and how do you then transition, how do you experience the transformation and then go to a whole new level, a new realm, which I term transcendence. I coach to cause, not symptoms. So I'm a causal coach and a coach intuitive, which you'll see as we go through a lot of what we're going to cover off today. I also specialize in what I term the default disempowered identity, that identity that hinders you from achieving your potential and or sustaining change. This to me is key as to why people are not proficient in the area of closing. And obviously I'm going to speak more into that as we go through the presentation. My key areas within leadership is co-creative leadership and equanimous leadership. That's a whole nother webinar. Raising consciousness of those who lead, those who are wanting to make a significant difference on the planet. And I've also had the privilege of being able to coach large teams, so multi-level marketing teams, franchising teams. At the height, I probably had about 275 team performance, peak performance coaching. I believe in KPI empowered cultures versus KPI disempowered cultures. And I've put a link in there to an article that I wrote specifically about that. I believe that the majority of organizations on the planet have a disempowered KPI culture, and I'm a stand for organizations to have an empowered KPI culture. And I've certified over 100 coaches in my methodology, and a lot of what I'm going to cover off today is pertinent to part of my training. So as far as some of the recommendations...
Sorry to interrupt, Sally. Are you screen sharing? Or is that about to start?
Can you not see my screen?
No. If you click on the share screen on the bottom.
That is what I have done.
The little green icon.
Sorry, my apologies. Share screen. Can you see it now?
That's it. Yes.
Hey, my apologies.
Go, girl.
Okay, good. Okay, good. Okay, good. So we had the clear intentions. We had what I'm not. Some of the logistics. The focus of the presentation is only focusing on the closing side of sales. I speak very fast, so I'm going to apologize up front. So just buckle up and listen in, because I'm just going to go straight through everything and then we can have a discussion afterwards. Feel free to take lots of notes. Obviously, we're recording the event, so you can listen to the recording afterwards. The advice provided is obviously over 25 plus years in the trenches. It's all tried and proven. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today is quite unorthodox, but it actually produces results. If you have any questions, feel free to capture those questions and then we can ask them at the end. As I touched on before, there is a self-audit that you can do either during the presentation or when you leave the presentation. I've got a Kiwi accent, so that may get in the way today. I've got a deep voice, and sometimes that throws people, and sometimes the terminology may be unfamiliar, even though we speak the same language in the UK, the States and so forth. Sometimes there may be terminology that you may not understand, but we can get clarity at the end of the presentation. And if you experience any resistance with anything tabled on today's presentation, really take that as a good sign. Because if you're wanting to experience any level of change, uncomfortability, resistance, and confrontation kind of like come with the territory. So let's get started. So what is the number one reason that you do not close? This is, in my arrogant opinion, based on my own experience and those that I've had the privilege to coach. What do you think that is? I'm going to tell you the answer. Is client selection. I would say upwards of 60 to 70% or more of those that you're in front of, you shouldn't be in front of. So there's a lot of self-critique and self-analysis when you don't close and why that is. And when I've had the privilege to coach people, it's like they're not clear on who it is that they're targeting, and they spend far too much time with people who fundamentally aren't committed. And then they make themselves wrong as to what's wrong with their process versus, well, 9 times out of 10, the person that you're in front of and all that time and energy that you've expended, you shouldn't really be in front of. So that, I'd say, you sort that one out more than anything, your strike rate will dramatically improve. I want to start out with the elements that are the impact of what it's costing you when you don't close. Now, obviously, given the time constraint today and wanting to spend far more time on you being able to leave the presentation with value. So of these elements, we're just going to quickly touch on them because the costs are too great. People will say, I'm not good at closing. If you got present to the cost of that, you certainly wouldn't tolerate it. And when you look at some of the costs, they're just too great. So frustration. Confusion. A lot of people love confusion. Now, I spoke about the default level of identity before. The default loves the strategy of staying confused. Great that you're confused, then you don't have to actually be responsible. But if you got present to the cost of tolerating not being proficient in this area, you'd actually do something about it. Overwhelm. The constant not understanding, why you're not proficient in that area and the overwhelm of that. Fear of losing your job, the financial pressure, dissatisfaction, self-criticism, resentment, fear and doubt, hopelessness, isolation, feeling isolated, resignation, wanting to give up, poor health, embarrassment, disappointment, failure, feeling unconfident, depression, bankruptcy, suicide. I'm wanting to start out here because it's kind of like pressing the bruise. That if you were to, because people can rattle off the cost of why they're not proficient in closing, given that that's our focus today. But if we truly got present to the cost, we'd do something differently. The amount of lawyers, dentists, farmers that are topping themselves right now, it's crazy. And there's not enough conversation about the costs. So one of the recommendations, and you'll see that when we get to the 16 elements, is actually writing down what is it costing me to not be more proficient in this area. Now, what I'm really clear on is that the majority of people that are on this call today are proficient in sales. So I'm not wanting to teach you to suck eggs. But because we're focusing on specifically the closing element, and you'll see that when we get to the 16 elements, of the elements that I'm going to cover off, if you're proficient in certain areas, which obviously you are, then that's not going to be where our focus is. Of the 16 elements, there might be 5 elements that require refinement. And when we get to that area of the presentation, that's where you're going to get the gold today. However, I've identified the top benefits as far as if you did become more masterful. In the area of closing, obviously there's a hell of a lot of spin-offs. So you're going to feel more successful. The freedom that you find when your strike rate improves, obviously more fulfillment and enjoyment. Getting into the slipstream, if you've seen the movies Finding Nemo, the turtles are all over the place, and then they get into alignment and takes you. So teaching people on how to get into the slipstream with sales is obviously key to part of what I teach. Having a magical client base, more abundant consciousness going on, increased productivity, less effort, miraculous results, improved strike rate, finding the gold, feeling invincible. You know, when you're finding evidence, evidence-based people are waiting for evidence to show up before they trust. Trust-based people know that if they trust, the evidence will show up. A high percentage of people are evidence-based people. So part of what I'm wanting to impart today is how do you find evidence that you can actually shift your current experience? Obviously, more money in the bank, earning more respect, and being able to make a more significant difference. So the crux of today's presentation lies in these 16 elements. This is a model that we don't have time to cover off, but we do have time to cover this off. So I'm wanting to walk through each of these elements, and this is where you can self-audit yourself, 0 to 10 in each of the elements. And I'll give you a few examples as we go through them. So this is tried and proven based on thousands of people that I've had the privilege to coach, specific to the area of closing. So the first one is beliefs. Beliefs run the show. To what degree are the beliefs that you are holding hindering you from converting every time? An example would be a guy that was probably in his 50s in a franchise company. He had been a CEO. He was now in a business consultancy franchise. The two areas that were hindering his ability to be able to specifically close is that he had a very a bad stutter when he was younger, and he also was actually a POM living in New Zealand, and the terminology of POM he felt that would be held against him. Now, the things that you're operating over the top of due to your belief is what's hindering you in the way of being able to close. Cut a very long story short, I said to him, use the thing that is in the way as your trump card. So I did some role play with him, and he had never signed, so he was charging $3.5 grand per month in a 6-month partnership in what he was in business consultancy. He'd never signed somebody at $3.5 grand a month. Cut a long story short, part of his enrollment technique, which we changed, we actually brought that up front. So I said to him, when you go into a sales call, actually use it. So there's a few things you need to know about me. I used to have a stutter. You may hear that in my languaging. And I'm a POM, as you can see, but don't hold that against me. So actually make it a bit of fun. And cut a long story short, he didn't even have to go into and explain his process. They signed at 3.5 because he actually let them into his world. He actually was vulnerable in front of them. So the two key things from a sales perspective, because you're in front of a human being, is storytelling and emotional connection. And he found some evidence that if he used that which he was operating over the top of, then he'd be able to obviously enroll people into who he was, because he was being far more authentic. So number one, if you were to mark yourself 0 to 10, what beliefs do you have that are running that are hindering you from being effective in closing? If they're not identified, you can't do anything with them. So the first thing is to just identify what your beliefs are. Second is energy. When you're endeavoring to convert someone, does the energy lessen, become hesitant or weaker? So most people are quite good at the networking side of things. They're good at the enrollment side of things, but specifically they go really, really good. And then when it gets to the close, because it's to do with money, their energy becomes, they go somewhere. They're not as impactful in the close as they are in the other elements of the sales process. So if you were to mark yourself 0 to 10 energetically, do you notice that you're not as strong when you get to the having the money conversation, dealing with navigating the objections, which we're going to cover off today? Energetically, how is your energy? So if you were to mark yourself 0 to 10, do you know that you're not as strong in that area that needs to be looked at? Your energy needs to be as strong as it is in the other areas. A lot of people say, hey, I'm really good at networking. I'm really good at the other elements of the sales process, but I'm not when it comes to closing. That needs to shift. Your energy needs to be solid, more so in that area more than any other area. Healing. Have you healed all scarcity beliefs you have running about money and self-worth? Closing has a lot to do with your relationship to money and has a lot to do with your relationship with your self-worth. Due to confidentiality, I can't relay before and after stories, but healing has a lousy listening in the marketplace. If you do not, beliefs run everything. So if you are unclear on any of your issues that you have with money or any of your issues to do with self-worth, remembering everything to do with closing is to do with emotional connection with another human being. And there's not enough focus, I believe, in that area. So sometimes, over and above identifying what the beliefs are, then you need to go and do the work with reference to finding the right practitioner to be able to heal those particular beliefs. Otherwise, it will hinder you being able to achieve what it is that you want. People, I've coached many millionaires and billionaires, they are as dysfunctional with money as those that don't have them. Terrified of spending it, terrified of losing it. If my buffer money drops between, 15 million, I'm naked to the world. Just because you've got money doesn't mean you don't have monetary beliefs that aren't serving you. So healing to me is key. Again, it's not something that's focused on specifically in the area of sales. But the self-worth piece and the monetary beliefs that you have has a huge impact on your effectiveness in closing. Compassion. To what degree are you compassionate towards yourself when it comes to your life contract? Again, nobody's talking about this. I can train somebody, all of the linear processes on what you need to do with reference to sales, but every single person on the planet is different. We all have a different fingerprint. So obviously your life learnings are different from somebody else's life learnings. So you can take the linear approach and apply certain things and do everything right of all the sales trainings that you may have adopted before, but for whatever reason, you're still not producing the results. So there's a difference between doing everything to get a result versus being in the experience. And sometimes I believe that different people have a life contract and you have different learnings. So you can't go and compare yourself and one process applies to all. You getting a clearer understanding of what it is that you're here learning. Everything that I'm covering off today is more about the psychology of change and the impact that that has. And having compassion for your individual journey and as to what's unique about what's stopping you in the area of sales, specific to closing, is something that needs to be looked at, in my opinion. Number 5, client selection. Mentioned that before. This one specifically, I'd said 60 to 70%, but 90% of the time, if you can shift that dynamic, your closing rate is going to be exponentially a lot different. So being able to mark yourself, do you know the top 5 criteria for the ideal client for you? Do you follow that religiously? And as far as if you were to kind of like look back in the last month, maybe different obviously due to the COVID-19 situation, but how committed are you both for yourself and or your sales teams? How clear are they on who your ideal client is and do you follow that religiously? So being able to mark yourself in that area. Seduction. Do you give away the kitchen sink? To what degree do you seduce but not give everything away? So I have seen so many times, because people are trying so hard and they're wanting to provide value, they've actually overstepped the mark and they've given too much away, and so the person really doesn't have to pay you money because you've given too much away. So learning the art of seduction. To what degree do you look at, from a closing perspective, how seductive are you with being able to land certain things for the individual but not give too much away? So holding your cards, but being able to entice them. So the art of seduction is key to becoming more effective in your closing. It's something that I learned quite a few years ago, and I'm pleased that I did. The ability to seduce so that you intrigue people to wanting to know more. Time wasters and tire kickers. To what degree do you get all the elements right and then do not convert, knowing that the person in front of you isn't committed? So I'm just going to jump to this particular slide here. We will not have time to go into this in detail today, but I just wanted to touch on it. So this is one of my sales techniques with reference to taking people from the court called want to the court called committed. Most people understand the tennis court analogy. So somebody's sitting on the tennis court of want, and then there's a tennis court called committed. If you look actually down on the tennis court, if you're in the court called want, There's no possibility there. You're operating from an old level of identity and you're in sabotage mode. Human beings love to sabotage. And people are on the want court. They're in their head. They're disempowered. They're in the known realm. They distrust the unknown realm. They're stuck in the how, scarcity conscious, and they're disconnected and disassociated. 80% of the people that you're talking to are in the want court. Our job is to be able to bridge the gap and get them onto the court called committed, where they're heart-based, empowered, accessing the unknown realm, being able to reveal how, more future-based, more prosperity in their thinking, and connected and associated. So down the bottom, confrontation, resistance, and uncomfortability, true access points to unrecognizable transformation. Our job in the sales process is to get them from the court called want to the court called committed. So just back up to so when I was talking about to what degree do you get all the elements right, and then you do not, knowing that the person in front of you is not committed. So a lot of the time this comes back to the client selection process. They are, you know, in the preliminary phases of enrollment, whether somebody is committed or not. And if you're operating over the top of the intuitive signs, I'm a coach intuitive, you need to listen to your intuition more, because what your intuition is telling you is right. Here is my enrollment registration process. It's a 4-pronged process. Although we're focusing on closing, I need to kind of like just touch on the key elements with enrollment registration. This for me is tried and proven. I don't deviate because it works. Regardless of the industry sector that you're in, regardless of the services that you provide, I believe that this process works. Phase 1 is about trust. You have to, prior to going into the next phase, be able to understand the landscape of who you're in front of, ask the zillion questions. They're not there interviewing you. Don't get onto their court. You get them onto your court. Ask all the questions that you need to be able to understand the landscape of who you're in front of, so that you know where to navigate your conversation. In phase 1, once you have all the information, you've reached that level of trust with the individual, there's an emotional feeling that you get before you go into phase 2. It's like a click that you kind of like, yeah, I've got them. I understand where they're at. I know where to navigate the conversation. If you don't intuitively get that first emotional connection sign, then it's going to hinder your ability to close. So I would not go into phase 2 until I know that I've got that intuitive sign of knowing that I've done enough in understanding in my investigatory stage everything that I need to know about them. Phase 2 is when I share consummate to what they share. So there's a match that they feel as though that I understand their world. I've heard everything in the language of what it is that they've conveyed. In the sharing, I will match what it is that they've said to me. That there is the second emotional connection point with reference to them going, this person really understands where I'm at. Spending time in these 2 phases is critical to your effectiveness when you get to closing, in my opinion. And then when we get to closing, we're going to touch on how do you navigate the objections that you usually get with people. Which brings us into element number 8, scarcity vampires. How often do you attract would-be clientele who use money as their main excuse to register and or convert? So given that I'm a coach intuitive, I never get onto the court of the client. My job is to get them onto my court. So if somebody would ever be stupid enough in front of me to raise money as an objection, then I would have a deeper conversation with reference to how often have you used money as an excuse to talk, how often have you used money as your relinquishment bucket to actually not forward, what it is that you want in your life. Being able to have a conversation with somebody, because it's never about the excuse that they raise, which is what I'm going to touch on when we get into objections. So there are times when people in the closing side of things, they often attract people who always use money as the excuse. That has to do with you. If you're attracting people like that, that has to do with whatever beliefs you've got going on that are hindering your ability to be able to attract the right clientele, where vibration, where energy, where resonance. So where you're operating is what it is that you're going to attract. You go to work on some of your beliefs around money and self-worth, watch out. Being inappropriate. To what degree are you inappropriate in the close? This is where the intuitive listening comes in. There are often times, and all of you know from a sales standpoint, that you're sitting there and you're listening and you think that what they're telling you is bullshit, or they're completely sabotaging themselves, and or it's a bit hypocritical what it is that they're saying, or they're doing some level of martyrdom. There's some default level of behavior that's being administered, but you're not saying anything. So me being me, I will actually raise that. So I will speak into that which I am sensing in the conversation. I want to be a contribution to the individual. I'm not wanting to operate over the top of what's actually going on. And this is where, instead of it being so SSD, serious, significant, and dramatic, it actually can become enjoyable and humorous. But again, you've got to own who you're being when you're facilitating a conversation like that. Being appropriate in the area of closing is not going to get the traction. So being inappropriate, that's not being rude, but being inappropriate and calling it as you see it. But to be able to have that conversation, you need to own who you're being, which is one of the elements we're about to cover off. So being inappropriate, 0 to 10. If you're on this call today and you know that when you get to the closing part, you don't say anything about what you know you're picking up intuitively, that's an opportunity to shift that. The next one, going in. To what degree do you go in when you want to back out? To what degree do you call it as you see it with no hesitation? Again, I'm committed to the individual understanding the difference between wanting something and being committed to it. So my calling card is that when I want to back out of a conversation, this is as important in any relationship that you have from a communication standpoint. But if you were to actually use that opportunity, that when you want to back out of a conversation, that's actually the opportunity to go in. And that's always where the gold is. Always. If you trust the unknown more, that's another area within sales. Because most of the sales training is so structured, traditional, and linear, people aren't trusting their intuition. Everything that I do is intuitive. Intuitive signs. Do you land the emotional connection points pivotal to phases 1 and 2 of enrollment and registration? You have to emotionally connect. The two things of anything out of today's presentation is storytelling and emotional connection. Who you are in front of as a human being. If you're wanting to enroll somebody into who you are and what you do, there needs to be alignment in those two areas, emotional connection and storytelling. And being able to not be so pre-prescribed with your storytelling, being able to, again, trust your intuition with reference to what comes through. Intuition is your most powerful muscle. Loving objections. To what degree do you love objections? Go looking for them, revel in them, raise them before anybody else does. So a bit of role play. If I'm sitting in front of John and we get to the point where objections come up, so this is how I would facilitate a conversation. But I can get away with this conversation because I've earned the right to be a teller, which is another aspect of closing. When you've done the years in the trenches, you've earned the right to tell people rather than wait to enroll them and stuff. When you own who you are and what it is that you're conveying, people will sit up, shut up, and listen. So when I come to the area with reference to objections, this is how I would facilitate it. So John, usually when we come to this juncture, people would like to raise these things called objections. I need to talk to my accountant. I need to talk to my bookkeeper. I need to talk to my wife, my husband. I don't have enough time, energy, or money. So I know, John, you don't want to insult my intelligence, and John, I don't want to insult yours. So we're not going to have this inane conversation on this conversation called objections. Are we, John? Yes or no facilitation at this point is very, very powerful. So then you elevate the conversation. You take it right away from getting into any of that bullshit conversation around objections, and you can have a different level of consciousness, different level of conversation that is far more beneficial because it's never about the objections. And that's what I'd say to John. So John, if you want me to get onto your court and you want me to convince me that all of the objections have some validity here, because here's the thing, John, I'm only interested in working with people who are committed. So if you're not committed, hey, that's all good. So the pushing away technique always works. Not being attached to the outcome really works, obviously from a closing standpoint. So as far as objections are concerned, there's different ways of being able to deal with them. I personally, that's how I deal with it. However, if you are going to get into a conversation around objections, you need to love them and you need to raise them before they do. Most people, when it comes to closing, they wait for the client to raise the objections and whatever that objection is, and then they have to get into the, and that immediately when they start raising the objections before you do, you're on their court and they're going to win because they'll be stuck in their paradigm. Being able to raise the objections, again, you should have understood the landscape prior to getting to this point to be able to know what their objection is going to be, to be able to circumvent it, cut it off at the pass before you actually have to go and have that lower level of conversation, because as we all know, it's never about that. So at the moment, rating yourself 0 to 10, how effective are you in the area of objections? Fall in love with them, go looking for them, have fun with them. Most people don't love objections. I love them. If somebody is stupid enough to raise an objection in front of me, well, good on you, good luck, you know? Which comes into the last 4, which is about owning it. To what degree do you completely and utterly own who you are, what you do, what you're selling with pure abandon? Because if you don't, if there's anything there where you don't own who you are, you will not ever become masterful in closing. You have to own it 110%. And if you don't, go and do the work, you know, whether that's coaching related, mentoring related, healing related, the cost of not is too great. So owning it has a huge issue. So when I said before, I'm a teller, I've earned the right, I've done the years in the trenches. So when somebody's in front of me, I don't piss ass around. So an example would be, this is years ago, somebody came to me, they were interviewing a cross-section of executive coaches. She sat down in front of me with an arrogant attitude and she was trying to interview me. I said, we can cut this conversation really short. It was only 5 minutes. I said, thank you for the coffee. And she said, where are you going? I said, here's the deal, darling. I said, you're not here interviewing me, I'm here interviewing you. This is my criteria. And if you're interested in playing that game, more than happy to have this conversation. But if you're here to interview me with a cross-section of other coaches, then I'm not interested and I wish you well. Anyway, she went back to her people and said, I want to sign with Sally. Why did that happen? Because I owned it. Yeah. The day that you get on the other person's court, you will not win. You need to learn how to train people to get onto your court, stay on your court, to be able to navigate the conversation and honor the conversation. Getting present to the cost. To what degree do you drive home the pain points and get them present to the cost of not signing, not being committed? That pressing the bruise is critical. You should have, in phase one, when you've done all of your landscape investigation of understanding all of the dichotomy of who they are, is what are the pain points? Your pain points are the gold, people. It's the gold. And you need to push that bruise when you get into the closing phase of raising those, because those people are disassociated from the cost. They can rattle off the cost, but they're not present to the cost. Your job is to get them present to the cost so that they can feel the pain. So then there's no alternative but to sign. Claiming the space. To what degree do you claim the space well in advance? In my case, offering the 1 hour free consultation and removing all resistance to them signing. Has a lot to do with you owning who you are, but being able to claim the space well in advance. I can smell it. Well, before I get in front of somebody, I know whether I'm going to sign them or not. It's not up to them to assess me and have what my goods are they going to be good enough for them to, none of that. I'm owning it. So when I go in, I'm going to claim the space energetically. I'm going to claim who I am and how I'm communicating so that they get that they're in the presence of something. And that has a huge impact on the outcome. I find that in this particular area where closing is concerned, due to the beliefs and the behaviors and so forth, people aren't owning and or claiming who they are in the equation. You've got to command your presence when you're in front of somebody. And the sweet spot, to what degree do you experience the joy of signing when the would-be potential client reaches the sweet spot? I have seen so many times where people are in front of somebody, the person has agreed to sign, and then they haven't read that, and they've still tried to overcook it. They've still tried to keep enrolling and all the rest of it. You need to, when somebody wants to sign them, you know? Again, that's to do with some level of insecurity this person has. People don't listen. Reading those signs that when somebody, I've seen so many people attached to the process, long-winded processes. If you can sign somebody in the first 10 minutes of a conversation, sign them in the first 10 minutes of the conversation. Everything else can happen afterwards. Don't be so stuck to process. I know that in the first 5 minutes of me engaging with somebody, whether they're going to sign or not, and that's up to me as to whether I want to sign with them. It's not up to them. Turn the whole thing around from a reverse psychology standpoint. This is about you interviewing them, not them interviewing you. You reclaiming your power in that regard. These are 16 elements. My recommendation after the presentation is to be able to self-audit yourself, 0 to 10. If a lot of these areas you'll be proficient in, don't focus there. Re-rank lowest to highest, and then go to work on those that are in the lowest ranking, anything that you got under 5, and find the right resource to be able to assist you to do that. Enrollment registration, just to reiterate, getting the emotional connection points in the first 2 phases are critical to you being able to be effective when you get to the area of closing. In the closing area, getting them present to the cost is key, which you should have gleaned from obviously phase 1. And again, not wanting to teach you to suck eggs, this is pretty stock standard sales. Being able to bridge the gap between what they want and what it is that they're committed to. So I'm just going to jump down to 2 slides before I cover off So there's me and Mark in the middle about bridging the gap. About 80% of people want something versus being committed to something. So it's all about bridging the gap, and that's where you guys come in. So most people are sitting in the camp called, I'm not ready, I'm not interested. Not now. Or I'll follow your content. Those primarily are where most people live, versus the 20% who are actually committed, that they're ready to go. They want to monetize whatever it is that they're on about. The most expensive option of anything with reference to sales, obviously, is doing nothing. So the want versus commitment, being able to read, which is going back to that whole client selection aspect before, is so critical. Knowing that the person in front of you is committed. Is their radio on? Trying to talk to people who've got their radio off is all too hard, all too hard. Now, I'm just conscious of time. How are we going for time here, people? 5 o'clock, right. So just let me just cover off 2 things. So as far as being able to leave this conversation, we're obviously going to go into some Q&A in a moment. You can ask any questions. Of those 16 elements, they're tried and proven. Being able to rank yourself, being able to go to work on those that are the lowest ranking is where the takeout is from today. However, obviously, those of you know Mark and his skill base. For those that are actually not on the call today but want to listen to the recording, here is obviously Mark's contact details. We've created some packages today, a 3-prong package. For those of you who have never had a power hour with Mark, highly recommend just doing it. So it's a 1-hour immersion session. Obviously, given his speciality, being able to get in front of the right people, obviously from a closing standpoint, is critical, and being able to leverage Mark's network in that regard. So his bronze package is self-explanatory. His silver package is being able to have 2-hour immersion sessions with Mark over a 90-day period, being able to, you can imagine, over a 90-day period, go from woe to go, being able to leverage aspects of his network and being able to become far more proficient in that upfront piece before you actually get to closing. And then if you want the full Monty package, being able to work with Mark over a 6-month period. Again, just to time constraint today, we don't have time to go through this in detail, but feel free to listen to the recording and have a look at that afterwards. But Mark does also offer the power hour is the best vantage point from my perspective to be able to understand what could be possible for you today with Mark's support. Here's some context details about myself. I write leadership articles about leadership and mindset on a weekly basis. There's quite a vault of information. Feel free to access that via LinkedIn. LinkedIn's my only medium from a business standpoint. And also there's a presentation there that you may wish to have a look at as well, a bit of background on what I do. And these are the packages that I have today. So if anything out of today's presentation has resonated to you and you want to get down and dirty with reference to customizing something specific to you, the bronze package is 1.5 hours on the phone with myself to be able to leverage off today's presentation and go do some deep dive. There's also the silver package with reference to over a 90-day period, being able to transcend anything that you're wanting to transcend, specifically sales related. The full Monty package for me is where I pick everything up, not just sales, but your entire life personally and professionally. Obviously, it's advantageous to the UK because with exchange rate, it's half the price of what I charge in New Zealand dollars. Again, you can look in that at your own time. So we're just going to finish with just leaving you with that last slide. Our job is to work with people who are committed. It's not wrong to be in the camp of wanting it. But if there's anything that I'm wanting to get across in today's presentation is getting present to the cost of not being as proficient as you would like, specifically in the closing process. Because that changes obviously everything, hence the benefits that I raised in the presentation today. So I think I'm at time, am I, Mark? Oh, you're on mute there, my friend. Hey,
bang on. Yeah,
bang
you must have German blood in you, like I have. 1 minute past. Very tempted to sign up with Mark's gold package. Can you send me his bank details? We've had a couple of questions in. Siru asked, how often should you follow up without feeling like you are bothering someone and you hence do not want to lose the customer?
Beautiful. So the default identity. Time and time again, I have found evidence where you go and make it mean something about somebody not getting back to you. Never leave somebody without a date and a time so that you don't have to wait for somebody to respond. So I believe if you were to take away what I call future-based projections, you're projecting into the future as to why they're not getting back to you, why they're not in your time frame. So people live in projections, meaning-based projections, noticing what those projections are and standing on the court. I've had so much evidence in my own experience and those of others when I've removed those projections and I've stayed strong. If you are clean with your intent about your stand and your commitment to the individual, devoid of these default-based projections, then you know you're clean. And if you stay the distance, 9 times out of 10, you'll find evidence that it's legitimate as to why they haven't come back to you. It's legitimate as to why it's not happening within your time frame. So personally speaking, if you're clean with your intent, if you park the future-based projections and that you're committed to the outcome, then stay the distance. But you've got to be clean in that alignment with reference to what it is that you're standing for. Does that help?
That is a perfect answer in my book. Our stats fetishist, Gary Nuttall, has asked, what's the difference between owning the objections versus appearing aggressive?
Nice. So again, there's always 2 contexts to everything. You're operating from an empowered context or a disempowered context. If my intention is to not be aggressive, right, the ownership piece, so I often come across as quite confronting, quite intimidating, and evangelistic. Example. Often I say to people, there's a few things you need to know about me. Some people find me quite confronting, find me quite intimidating, and a bit of an evangelist. I'd like to reframe all of that and just say I'm a very passionate woman who's passionate about what she does. So how you communicate and self-deprecation really works when you can kind of like frame everything up front. If you know there's certain things about your style, then use that to your advantage with self-deprecation up front.
That works really well in the UK, especially the self-deprecation bit. Yeah.
Well, that thing that's in the way. So if you don't own, if it's coming across that you're aggressive, then it will be a case of you not owning it, right? But what comes with the territory of being a powerful person is that you will be confronting, intimidating to people. But you've got to own that and tell them that, yeah? And make it okay for them, yeah? So framing up front is really important. Find out what your traits are. Mine are about confrontation, resistance, and occurring as evangelistic. Yes, that's the case. But I'm going to own that and make it a bit of fun and be able to reframe it for them just to make it all good.
Excellent. I'm going to unmute everyone now and just dive in if you've got any question of Sally. And then after that, we'll network a bit more and then close. So I'm unmuting you all now. Does anyone have any other questions? I'm sure Mary has. Mary, are you with us? Hang on.
I've got a quick question, Noel, when you're ready.
Go for it.
I was just saying, when you actually come up to someone, like this is Paul, and you know, you go to you start doing your pitch, and they say, "Oh, can you just send me an email? I'm busy at the moment." How do you deal with that? Just in trying to keep their attention once they've already told you, just send me an email, and you know, and we all know what that really means. How would you deal with the person there?
Going back to what I said before about whose court are you playing on? If you play on their court, you're dead from the start. So talking to people whose radio is on versus talking to people whose radio is off, 9 times out of 10, is that person really somebody that you want to be having a conversation with? That's a question for you.
So really, you're saying that, yeah, and this is what I do really. If I get someone who's a bit objective right at the front and they've got that attitude, where I used to spend 10 minutes trying to convince them, listen, you know, this is such a great product. Now I think, right, I'm off and I'll go and speak to someone. Yeah.
It's respecting who you are. It's come up to my level. I ain't coming down to your level. Let's part company type, that statement. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of people with their radio on, plenty of people, but 9 times out of 10, we spend far too much time with people like that who've got their radio off. And then we wonder why we're, you know, feeling frustrated by the process.
Very good answer.
Yeah. Next, move. Yeah. And they're out there. And when you can have some fun with it, we're so serious, significant, and dramatic, due to all of the costs that are involved, versus lightening up the energy, having some fun with it, you know, being able to regenerate yourself after the zillionth no that you've received. It's kind of like, you know, real estate's a really good example of how do you keep regenerating yourself after you've received 1,000 no's. Well, you won't receive as many no's if you get your client selection sorted out. If there's 3 things of the 20,000 things in this conversation, 3 things as a takeout today. One is client selection. Get really, really clear on who you're talking to. That is 90% of the game one. Storytelling. You have no idea how powerful it is, regardless of what it is that you're trying to sell, whether it's a widget product or whatever it is that you're trying to sell, linear or non-linear. It's to do with storytelling, not pre-prescribed storytelling, but being able to enroll that person into understanding the world that you're coming from through storytelling and emotional connection. Those two intertwined, emotional connection and storytelling, because it's always a human-to-human interaction. And my frustration with standard sales training is that there's far too much linear training and not enough non-linear training with reference to your most powerful muscle being intuition. There is so much that you need to read intuitively that will give you whatever you're picking up intuitively, and the more that you focus on that, the more return you're going to get, because it's always bang on the money.